I've been waiting for a week to get to this point. It's taken me a minute to kind of digest what I just read, which is probably the longest book I've ever read in my entire life. But you probably know this book because there's only one hectically long book that I know of that is on booktok for the last few months. And it's this, Alchemised by Senlinyu. Now, if you don't know this, if you don't recognize it, because it does look a bit different from what is actually sold in the stores, it's because this is a proof copy. So some of the reps go around, they give it to certain people, reviewers, bookstore owners, companies like Exclusive Books, Wagon Books, etc., to kind of market the book. Say, hey, this book is going to be amazing. You're going to want to read it so you can understand it, so you can market it properly, so you can talk about it for us. And I was lucky enough to get a copy from one of those that have received this. So this is actually a numbered copy of this book, of the proof copies. I believe only 100, this is 130, so there were 129 copies out there. But this book is insanely long. It is 1,000, close to 1,000 pages. I'm not sure just below, just before, but it is 1,000 pages of sci-fi, romantasy, booktok amazingness. But before we get into it, my name's Josh, and if you're new here, I review books. Any kinds, anything that comes across my way that interests me, I review it. But enough of all that. Let's get into it. So a little backstory on the author and basically the premise of the plot. No spoilers, of course, for this little segment, so you have been warned. But what I know of, and my knowledge is from being in bookstores, from meeting people, from seeing TikToks, etc. But Senlinyu is a fanfic writer who basically wrote this amazing, super popular fanfic for Draco and Hermione that basically set the premise for what this book is. A sort of dark, romantasy academia, but not really, because it really doesn't play such a big part. But academia, romance between a tortured hero and a bright, caring FMC. And essentially, she wrote it. She became so popular, she took it, she transferred it into its own little separate universe, untouched by Harry Potter, by Draco, by Hermione, just certain traits similar, of course, but made it its own. And booktok obviously took it up. This is a debut novel, from my understanding. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a debut, and what a debut it was. So to give you some background, to see whether this book is kind of for you if you'd like to read it. Helena is the FMC. You meet her when she is stuck in this capsule, like frozen in time sort of prison that is essentially should have knocked her out completely and kept her in stasis, completely unconscious, for when her imprisoners were ready to make use of her via forced labor or any kind of other means. But she was left there incomplete, basically. So the process to put her in the stasis pod was incomplete. She was left immobile, vulnerable, but still conscious, unable to move. But for months and months on end, her mind was awake. She was aware that time was passing. Of course, that has like its own psychological effects on a person. But for whatever reason, this happened to Helena. And eventually it's discovered, hey, this girl, this rebel, according to the people that imprison her, has been awake, improperly imprisoned for so long. And when they bring her out, they use the magic known as alchemy in this book, the magic system, to kind of peer into her mind to kind of see exactly what happened to her. They can't. They discover that her mind was rewritten at an alchemy level to direct thoughts and distribute them in ways that can't be tracked or read by other people. So mind readers couldn't just get into her memories and see what had happened. But the thing is, the reason why that on itself isn't interesting enough, she is a part of the rebellion or the resistance. And basically, there was a war where necromancers and their tribe basically rose up and took over this country. And it was a serious civil war to the point where it was kind of uncertain who was going to win. The resistance, the holdfast, which were the regency, the people that were in charge of the country, the state, before the necromancers rose up, and Helena was a part of them. And once the necromancers rose up, the civil war happened, and eventually it was back and forth the whole time. But Helena can't remember what happened. She can't remember the result of the war. She can't remember what had happened to her, how she had ended up imprisoned in the first place or captured. She can't remember what happened to her friends, what had happened to Apollo, what had happened to the other holdforce, what happened to the resistance in general. She can't remember at all. And now it is the job of Kieran Ferrin, the High Reeve, to figure out exactly why or how her mind was rewritten and what is hidden. So personally, I would give this book a 4 out of 5 or an 8 out of 10. And I'm gonna take you with me or what my thoughts were as I was going through the book. So you're starting off with this great mystery. She's now sat there, no memory, no recollection of what happened, just this terrible, horrible world where everything she has loved for and everything that she can remember fighting for is gone. She can't understand it. She's just basically enduring this personal hell, torture by the Reeve, the loss of Luke. She doesn't know. Everybody keeps saying that he's dead. The resistance is over. But she can't remember anything. And for about 100 pages, I, for the life of me, could not get into it. And that is my only criticism for this book. For 100 pages, it was just horrible torture, treatment, experimentation. And I think, obviously, in this book, obviously, in fantasy, that you have the world building and the introduction of the plot. So getting it to gel at the right level while also introducing you to everything is always going to be hard. And I can always respect an author that does it extremely well, that does it good, that does it slightly, might maybe miss the mark. And I think the point I'm trying to get at is I don't think Sen did a bad job in any point of this book. I just think that this book is in general very dark. For the first part, because I think legitimately this book is divided into 2 parts. I think for the first part, you're introduced to the fallout of the war. You're introduced to what happens if the people that you think are the enemies have won. What happens to people that are torturing you, to the society that you were fighting against so much, to your enemies, and if they won, how did they reshape it? And everything that Helena had to go through via the High Reeve, through her imprisonment in the capsule, immediately out the capsule, the months and the years she spent with Farron afterwards, as he was trying to like see what was happening in her mind and trying to get forcibly rewrite her mind so that they can access those memories. It is very, very dark. And I think that was all I was getting from the first 100 pages. The very dark, horrific, brutal things Helena was going through. And I remember discussing this with a friend of mine, thinking, okay, I know that this book is large. And I usually fit like a few books in a month. So I was kind of getting a bit worried at a certain point where I realized I was at 105 pages and I wasn't really getting into the book. And like I said before, this is quite a large book. So I was thinking, am I really gonna have to like force myself to get into this book, to finish it, to finish the 900 other pages that I have not read yet. And that is nothing, again, that is nothing to say about Sen and the writing and the perfection of the story. It was just that I was struggling to connect with how dark the world was. I think a lot of people can connect with it a lot easier, but there's a lot of triggers, and those weren't the things that discouraged me, but those first 100 pages was where I was like, okay, what is going on here? All I'm getting is the brutality and the horror of this world. But then I read, and as soon as I got to page 150 and things started picking up, I could see the interactions between the High Reeve, Kaine, and Helena, and I could experience that little sliver that Sen gave us of chemistry between the two. I was like, hold up, what is going on here? She is being absolutely tortured and held prisoner by Kaine. So how exactly is the romance happening here? What is this layer? And I think that's clearly what the 100 pages are there for. They're kind of there to introduce the fact that this is the world, completely new, that she doesn't know. That is the world that she sort of kind of remembers, and this big gap is what she lost. And as you're reading through that 100 pages, you get that sense that, okay, there is something here. There should be something here. There is that connection. There's a reason why that character is important. There's a reason why this interaction is important. What exactly is the premise of this romance, this chemistry really between Kaine? Like, is it because he's a silver guard that is like super handsome but also cruel at the same time? So it's kind of like I was thinking, okay, it's a dark romance at this point. Is that the reason? But really what it was, and I think what didn't land for me specifically through that, was that the reason why the first 100 pages are probably the hardest to get through was because you are meant to feel the missing importance or the gap or the absence of her memories, and why she is the way she is, and how come all these things are happening. So I read it and I finished it. I read it for 2 weeks. The first probably 5 days were the 100 pages that I struggled with, 110, 15, and then immediately afterwards everything picked up. I found Helena a bit annoying before her memories popped back, because she seemingly always flirted between ending herself, taking revenge, finding things out, and kind of being complacent with everything that was happening to her. And I couldn't really understand that. And I think what made it worse was the fact that she was now in such a fragile state after being in stasis for so long, that every torture and everything they put her through to kind of like look at her brain and kind of force those memories out, left her in such a state that they had to like stretch out the periods they could do it. And then this kind of led to like moments where, not where the story was dull, but moments where she was kind of complacent and she was just okay with being in Kaine's mansion, being trapped, being like tortured, everything like that. But like I said, this book was so dark and it was so brutal that all these like, little tidbits and small little crumbs that Sen left us was like leading us to a point where it was like, there is something here. There is like a connection that you can't really see. What is this person of significance? And that's what drove me forward. So I was like, oh, this book is getting interesting. Like, I need to know. I need to know more about Kaine. I need to know more about Lancaster. I need to know more about, the guilds, what is going to happen to her. I also, and this is a trigger warning, so I will admit, if you aren't used to anything dark, so if you're not into dark anything, this is not for you. Then there's also the fact that there is, like, I think I'll just literally put up the trigger list like somewhere here, because it is important that you kind of clock the trigger list, because this book, I've gotten to the point where I've read quite a few trigger warning books, and I've kind of been like, okay, it's whatever, people, maybe I'm not as sensitive as some people, or maybe I'm not gleaming like how dark this book really is compared to some other people. But like, it's fine for me. This book definitely used every single trigger and every single element in there. So if you read it and you see you're not comfortable with something, I would highly, highly, highly suggest not to. But if you don't want spoilers, I think this is where you need to say goodbye. So, to get through everything up until the point where suddenly her memories start coming back was insane. I thought it was perfectly done. I think the fact that we got to see her struggling as a prisoner, seeing how harsh and brutal the necromancers and basically everybody could be, and how magic can be used to kind of force themselves into a person, into their brain, kind of forcing their presence in there, and how detrimental it can be to the psyche, to your mind, to your body. Everything was perfect. I think that really established the trend. Like seeing Helena being like so vulnerable and so like brittle after everything, it made so much sense. And because of that, it was so perfect. And it introduced this complexity of Kaine and the king of the necromancers. I forget his name now, but his name will pop up here. But seeing him and seeing how he treats Kaine and how this world is like so, it's kind of hard to not draw comparables to what's happening in today's world and everything like that, and the events that's happening at this specific time. But really, it set up the jeopardy and the stakes. But of course, I couldn't really do this review without talking about the essay. I couldn't talk about. I couldn't literally skip over this. This is such a crucial part of the story because you don't know what the relationship between Kaine and Helena is. Basically, you can see that something is there, but for whatever reason, it's not being explained. And then for the necromancy society to basically now be like, okay, we're lacking people that can use alchemy now. We don't have people that can use the magic anymore because we wiped them all out. So now we need to bring those prisoners or those female prisoners back so we can produce children with magical abilities. But because of the way alchemy works, you can't really have just anybody sleeping with anybody. You need to be compatible, otherwise, the one family's powers could cancel out the other family's powers and result in like a very weak baby that might not even survive. It's like that's how brutal this thing is. And so basically, they're now forcing the prisoners of the resistance to be into this repopulation program where they're gonna allow any necromancer or whatever basically to come and have come in basically uh, them so that they can have these children. And this is now essentially gonna power the dying king who is now torturing Kaine. So because now for whatever reason he's dying, he's losing his power and you don't know why. And of course, the king then decides, hey, she is an animancy, which is a super rare alchemy ability, and is sort of the same ability that the king has. Kaine is like the king's right hand man, quotations, because it's not like really, it's just like the public right hand man. But the king was like torturing Kaine and everything. He's like, cool, you need to have a baby with her. You have failed to have a baby with anybody else. He's refused to have a baby with his actual wife because that was also like a more of like a relationship, like a regency relationship, married for partnership, for power, etc., etc. So he doesn't have a child. So basically, he needs to have a child with her. And if not, they will take her from Kaine and send her basically to the repopulation program, which she obviously hears how horrible that is. Because there are actually just insane people. They make it sound like it's so amazing. Oh, you can earn your freedom, blah, 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 blah. But no. So now it's kind of like a thing of like, she knows how terrible it could be, but she also hates how it is now. And to compute in her mind that now she needs to have it with Kaine, her captor, or experience something much worse is like an equally horrific dilemma. And Sen, you are a cruel, cruel person for putting your poor reader through that. Because, oh my gosh. But of course, this book wouldn't be super long if our memories didn't come back. And eventually, they do. And they come back and they explain every single thing and every single question you have. So it goes back to a time in the hospital. She is obviously this very smart academic, but for whatever reason, you know, patriarchy, basically. The whole farce or the kingdom or the way the state is run before the necromancers rise up is kind of very discriminatory towards women. So she doesn't want to do anything. She doesn't want to harm anything. She just wants to be in the school. She wants to be in alchemy and everything like that. And she meets Luke, who is the whole first prince, the one that's going to become the ruler of this nation after his father. And he sees her as like his true friend. And of course, because of this relationship they established, she is willing to do anything to stay there in the school. And one of those conditions is that the fact that when she decides to study medicine or become a nurse in the hospital and everything like that during the war, they require her to become sterilized. And it's just layers like that that continuously build the story, and like it can't get any worse. And then it does get worse, you know? And to find out that Kaine is actually was the person that killed Luke's father, so he killed the king basically of the resistance and started the entire war. Then to find out actually he was giving information to the resistance, and that's where this relationship of Helena comes from. And to see every single character that is complex in emotion, emotive in values, and by this war that has basically eradicated their psyche to making them all shells of themselves, to see them jostle with all these different elements of the fact that Helena is like not there with him anymore, she's constantly in the hospital, or the fact that she rather prefers Kaine's company and his relationship and what he gives to her, because he's the only person that doesn't lie to her. You know, he reveals that actually, you know, they did all these things and they tell you all these things about religion and whatever, but it's all propaganda. You know, it isn't as simple as black and white. You know, the war is happening because of this and the war is happening because of that. And I didn't just kill Mans because Mans is like that, you know. And Kaine obviously has his own tragic story with his mom and with his father, and why he ends up being in this pivotal role for the necromancers. And it is such a beautiful story, as dark and as horrific and everything I say that. So it's kind of like a, you know, the other side of the ruler, or the other side of the coin. But it is such a beautiful story. And as much as I loved it, and as much as I don't know if I would read it again, but I would definitely advocate it for anybody else. But as much as I loved it, my second drawback was how annoying Helena was in the second part. So in the first part, she becomes complacent and there's no real jeopardy to escape Kaine. And obviously you're like led to believe there's a reason for that, and that kind of placates my annoyance somewhat in part one. But really my annoyance came in part two, where continuously she has the opportunity to escape. She is being used by the forces of the resistance. They don't care for her, essentially. They are using her relationship with Luke, the now king, because, or ruler, because somebody, Kaine, killed his father. They're now using her relationship and her care and her love for Luke to basically whittle her down and make her use every single essence of her energy, of her love and her care and her mortality at this rate to serve and rescue the people that are being injured in the war. And then when Kaine comes and is introduced as a double agent that is willing to give information of the necromancers to the resistance so they can win the war, this is then further exacerbated by the fact that now she begins to care for him. the resistance tosses her to them under the pretense that he asked for her. But it's revealed that that isn't the case at all. They threw it to her by themselves. That Kaine didn't ask for them or nothing like that. And then he reveals the propaganda. He reveals that actually how horrible, the academy is, how horrible the holdfasts are. And as much as Luke is a good guy and everything, it's kind of revealed that, everybody else around him, everybody that Helena has encountered on both sides are equally horrible, except for Kaine. And yet, no matter how deep the bond between Helena and Kaine get, she continuously refuses to leave with him. She knows that he is obsessed with her, that he loves her, that he will not do anything without her, and her safety is the only thing that is important to him, but his greatest weakness, basically. Because whatever jeopardy he is in, he disregards it completely, and he'll take it up to another level to ensure that she is okay, and that if this is going to get her out of the war, whatever the case is, he will do it. And she knows that, and she continuously uses him, basically. And then that's kind of where my annoyance fled to another level. And I was so 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 happy when Kaine pointed this out, and he's like, how come we make all these promises but I'm the only one that ever seems to hold them? Like, she's always like, I'll promise if you do this, I'll leave with you. I just need you to do this. Because she has this, her fatal flaw is her inability to let go of the people that treated her nice. Whether it is Luke, whether it is Luke's girlfriend, Luke's friends. Basically, anybody in resistance, it doesn't matter if she has a significant relationship with them. In her mind, in her heart, she's placed the resistance on this pedestal that she cannot let them go and leave them to suffer without her. But at the same time, she doesn't clock until much, 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 much later, back in the present, when when the consequences of her memories returning basically arises. Kaine is like, how come it's only me that seems to be holding these promises? Because you keep making these promises. This will be the last thing. And here we are again, still here. He's still underneath the king's control. She is now a prisoner, etc., etc., and he's done everything for her. But thankfully, the story jumps again from the past, having now remembered everything. You connecting the dots as the reader from the conversations and things that happened in part one, and the connections and the relationships between characters. And now you are back in the present, and now you realize that, okay, y'all gotta get out. They get out. There are a lot of things that happen in everything, and a lot of things, especially with Kaine. And eventually they get out. They find Luke's girlfriend with his baby, Paul, and basically they raise their child up, the child that they made through the repopulation or repopulation program, I think is what it's called. And they live on this island constantly in fear of what might happen before the regency of the necromancy is fallen, the state is rebuilt and everything like that. I gotta say, the MVPs came for how horrible and cold and brutal he is from page 1 on, well, not page 1, but page 54 when he enters somewhere around there. And this journey of trauma, of abuse, of love, of connection, of care, of priorities, of growth. Kaine goes through it all, and he made Helena that much more human. As much as he was a necromancer, as much as he was basically dead, as much as he was tortured by the king, and as much as he himself has blood on his hands, he is probably more human than Helena, because Helena seems to never really be able to grow or move past her flaws, while Kaine is able to embrace his flaws and prioritize different things in his life. And it's always been Helena. And then when Helena disappears because she ends up in the capsule, it's always about Helena's mission. And then when Helena appears back, it's almost like, okay, now it's back to Helena. And then when Helena has the baby, it becomes, okay, the baby. And once her child goes back to the island where everything, or the country where everything happened, and Helena is left with Kaine to kind of like grow old and everything, away from the war, away from everything that happened. It's almost like, yes, this is the moment where Kaine can be himself, and they can have this happy, emotional dream be accomplished that they've constantly had since yonkers ago in the war. But I can go on about this book forever. But let me know, let me know how you felt about the triggers. Let me know how you felt about how dark this book is. Let me know if you would actually pick this book up. I know the density, and as much as I have hyped it up, I think I've been told I don't really properly hype these books up. But let me know, tell me, would you read this? Would you tackle this book on? 1,000 pages is reading nothing in the grand scheme of things. If it takes you 2 weeks, if it takes you 2 months, if it takes you half a year, it doesn't really matter. Tell me if you read it, tell me what you thought about Kaine. Or tell me, more importantly, if you agree with my annoyances of Helena, or if I'm just standing here alone. But thank you, Sen, for this amazing book. And thank you guys for watching. And I'll catch you next time.